Om Ajnanatimrandasya Gyananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitamena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyev cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare Namo Namo Niruddhaya Shikesha Indriyatmane Namah Paramahamsaya Purnaya Nibhutatmane Swarga Pavarga Dwaraya Nityam Suchi Sade Namah Namah Hiranya Viryaya Chaturhotraya Tantave. Hare Krishna. So, we are continuing our discussion of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. In the previous session, we focused on chapter 17, and chapter 17 was all about how Maharaj Parikshit, being a transcendentally situated ruler, a Rajarishi, someone who was internally completely established in his identity as a servant of Krishna, while externally he was carrying out the duties of his Varna and Ashram. So he was a Raja Rishi. Externally he was a Raja, internally he was a Rishi. And how did he receive the symptoms of Kali? And we spoke in the previous sessions about how the king's role is to maintain collective consciousness, to maintain the collective consciousness of his subjects. He is responsible for a mass group of people. He is responsible for managing the environment in a very effective way so as to effectively manage the consciousness of his subjects. So he is going to be managing the consciousness of a vast group of people by effectively rearranging and ensuring that the environment is sufficiently protected, it's facilitated, there are resources available, all for the purpose of transcendental advancement of the subjects. This is particularly the role of a leader. A leader is responsible for collective consciousness, while individuals are responsible for their own consciousness. Every one of us has a leadership role. We spoke about it in the previous few sessions. Now, one of the symptoms, one of the ways in which Maharaj Parikshit wanted to manage the advent of Kali Yuga was that he noticed that irreligion was becoming very prominent. One of the most prominent symptoms of irreligion was the fact that the subject of Dharma, or the personification of Dharma as defined by scriptures, is actually extraordinarily minimized in its function and its ability to act. So Dharma itself, according to scripture, is supported on 4 pillars. And the 4 pillars of Dharma are austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. Over a period of several yugas, the 4 pillars of Dharma get diminished in their ability by a quarter. And when the advent of Kali Yuga, Dharma is practically at 1/4 of its capacity. And 1/4 of its capacity essentially means that there is absolutely no scope for austerity because of the lack of longevity, because of the lack of ability of the subjects. There is no scope for austerity. There is no scope for cleanliness. Internal and external cleanliness is a matter of being in touch with proper ideals and being able to manage such ideals, and also being in an environment which does not encourage activities and consciousness which are against our nature. That is not possible. It gets diminished. Cleanliness is absolutely gone. And then you have the extraordinary diminishing of mercy. Mercy or compassion is absent. And then finally, you have truth. Truth, as established by scripture, would also be attacked quite heavily. So we see in Kali Yuga, there's a tremendous amount of commentary on scriptures, which are very deviant, and in many cases, they completely delude and take away the reader from the subject matter which is being discussed. It makes the reading very ineffective. So these are the symptoms of Kali, very, very rapid rise of irreligion. And as a consequence, this irreligion was personified as a bull, while Mother Earth, the flourishing of Mother Earth, is dependent on the following of religion on the planet, on the surface. And that was also being challenged because Mother Earth herself was completely attacked, and she was in the form of a cow. So this was the particular witness, or he witnessed, Maharaj Parikshit witnesses this spectacle in the previous chapter. And then when he starts wanting to understand the nature of the specific disturbance which was being caused, he realizes that there was a personality of Kali who was a rogue or someone who was unqualified, but he was dressing up as an authority, and he was practically diminishing religion. And the diminishing of religion was being done by the encouragement of slaughter, which practically takes out mercy, by the encouragement of intoxication, which is practically deluding and does not allow the person to exist on truth. Then you have gambling, and then you have illicit sex. And these four activities are the specific activities which are particularly diminishing to the whole concept of dharma. And he witnesses that these four activities have become somewhat manifest in his kingdom. So it was so absent, his kingdom was so free of the influence of irreligion, that his kingdom started evidencing and showing symptoms of irreligion the moment it was seen. In other words, it's very difficult now to find out and come across places where irreligion is absent. Those days, it was the opposite. It was very easy for him to spot irreligion because everything else was spotless. So it was almost like a completely white cloth, with no shades of color. And on that, there is a spot, a blot of ink which falls on the cloth. And that's very easily spotted because the landscape is very clean. But if there are so many different disturbances on the piece of cloth itself, one more drop or one more piece of dirt on it is not going to really matter. So he manifests and he sees these results and he challenges them. Now, Kali is being managed very effectively by Maharaj Parikshit. What does he do? He tells him very clearly, you have no place in my kingdom. And then there is some negotiation which goes on between Kali and Maharaj Parikshit. And Kali is allowed to reside in places where there are slaughterhouses. Kali is allowed to reside where there is gambling. Kali is allowed to reside where there is intoxication. And Kali is allowed to reside where there is meat eating. Right? So Kali is allowed to reside in all the four different limbs of sinful life which diminish dharma. And then there is further negotiation. Kali practically is very clever. He asks Maharaj Parikshit to be allowed to reside in money. The exchange of goods those days was with gold. You see, people had gold and they used to have the ability to buy and sell, and have the ability to purchase their necessities. So Kali practically requested Maharaj Parikshit saying, the four places that you asked me to stay in are not adequate. I need one more place, and that place of residence should be gold. Maharaj Parikshit allows that, you see. And the reason he allows that is because in those days, the standard was that the economy was run by a fixed quantity of gold, which was in the hands of the king. And the subjects used to have the gold as well. and it used to be a primary form of exchange of value. So gold is being arranged by the Lord. You see, it cannot be manufactured. It is being arranged by the Lord. It is being mined. So there is a limited quantity. The limitation of gold is such that it is limited, and as a consequence, there's value to it. And also the fact that everybody accepts the value of gold across the globe. It's not that there's only one place where the value is being set and then there's going to be arguments. Everybody accepts how much it is and what it is and so on and so forth. There's a certain standard. So Maharaj Parikshit allows him to reside in gold because gold itself is the controlling element for sinful life. It's a double-edged sword. It is a double-edged sword because it can be used for the furtherance of spirituality. It can also be used for the furtherance of sinful life. And Kali asks that he specifically should reside there. Because if he is there, those people who accumulate wealth for the sake of accumulating wealth would also be led in their propensity to engage in sinful life. Now, that particular symptom is extraordinarily observed in modern years. And the reason is because in the modern day, the amount of money which a government can issue for the purchase of goods by its constituents or citizens is practically unlimited by definition. They do not have a basis for issuing money. The basis for issuing money during Maharaj Parikshit's time was gold. And by having and controlling gold, the king can control sinful life. Because the king would not allow for resources to flow in the area where it's not allowed. He would be able to control it because the quantity was quite limited. Nobody could manufacture it. He would be able to control it, and then he would be able to keep things in place. But right now, there's an extraordinary quantity of paper money which is flowing in the world, and this paper money has no basis of value. It has no basis. It is not linked to the amount of gold the government has. It was initially linked, but then it got delinked, you see, which is specifically mentioned by Srila Prabhupada in one of his purports. So Srila Prabhupada goes on to mention that it's appropriate for those who are Krishna conscious, if they are Krishna conscious, which is they are renounced and they have an objective of attaining Krishna. They have no other objective, which is Krishna consciousness. It is okay for them to have such resources because they would know how to allocate it. For everybody else, they would not. That is where Kali wanted to reside, because for everybody else who is not Krishna conscious, who is not aware of how to use resources in the services of the Lord, such people would not know how to use them, and as a consequence, it would lead to further degradation of life. So Srila Prabhupada writes about that as well. So the present predicament which is faced by world governments, the present predicament which is faced by the economies around the world, is being addressed 40 years back by Srila Prabhupada, because during his time, it was during the Great Depression in America, and where the gold standard was not, I think it was delinked at that point in time, and then it was completely removed by Richard Nixon in 1971. And then since then, there have been chaos in the market in terms of value. So we really do not know how much a US dollar is worth unless you measure it in terms of gold. So today you can say that what is value? Value is $1,200, because $1,200 allows you to purchase an ounce of gold. That's value. So if you calculate how much you bought your house, 5 years, 10 years back, how much you paid in dollars, calculate the value of gold at that point in time, and see how much you paid in gold and how much is your value today in terms of gold, you will know whether your house is appreciated or depreciated, because gold is going to be telling you the truth. You see, this was the standard, and this is what Prabhupada is talking about. So if the gold standard were to come back again, Prabhupada is arguing for it, if the gold standard were to come back again, and if the ruler is Krishna conscious, they would have the ability to control gold, and by controlling gold, they will control resources, and by controlling the resources, they will have the ability to enforce, piety, because the resources would flow towards projects which are absolutely required. So this is the plan which is being proposed by Srila Prabhupada, and he is also talking about the fact that delinking currencies from gold, delinking the US dollar from gold, is a primary mistake. As a consequence, the consequence is there's way too much paper money, and way too much paper money flows all around the world, and as a consequence, we have no sense of value. We also have no sense of being able to control it. Central governments today don't control their currencies. They cannot. They find it very difficult these days to manage the currency. It's very difficult to manage it. Anyway, those are side comments, but then I was not digressing because it's very much the topic of the chapter as to how a king controls. A king controls by holding back resources. Those days they had one resource, gold. These days you don't have that one resource. You have paper money. And that's the particular specific subject which Srila Prabhupada was touching upon, that a king, if he can control paper, gold, then he would be able to allocate gold towards proper areas of spending, spiritual areas, and as a consequence, he would also limit the spending towards areas which are problematic, and he would be able to do so. So that time, 5,000 years back, Parikshit Maharaj agreed that Kali can reside in gold because he was completely in control of gold in his country. Today, we can't say that. We cannot really say that. And today, the calamity is that no one has any control. No one has any control. So this was the specific topic which Srila Prabhupada is dealing with in the chapter as to how a king is supposed to manage. Gold in itself is not problematic. The problem is in whose hands is gold going to be in. If it is in the right hands, then it can be used to fight a religion, where religion can be established. So Maharaj Parikshit, 5,000 years back, he was able to re-establish religion because he was in control. The 4 legs of the bull were restored to full capacity in his reign because he was a saintly king. Even though it was the beginning of Kali, he re-established them. And then there was deterioration after his reign. So gold in the hands of a saintly ruler, gold in the hands of a saintly person is perfectly fine because they would be able to allocate resources effectively to further the consciousness and to further the plans of the Lord. Gold in the hands of the miscreants would be an instrument of Kali, where they would further their agenda of spreading irreligion, which is to practically encourage slaughterhouses, encourage the drinking of intoxicants, encourage illicit activity and gambling. Okay, all of this are the 4 pillars of a religion. It could be encouraged in the hands of people who are unqualified. So Srila Prabhupada was very nicely talking about that particular aspect of controlling by kings with the aid of maintaining a certain gold standard. Okay, now in this chapter, which is chapter 18, here we again are talking about a very, very poignant topic. And this topic is where a saintly king such as Maharaj Parikshit is moving from being a ruler to a renunciant. He renounces his kingdom, practically gives up his role of managing the kingdom, and sits on the banks of the river with Sukadev Goswami and begins to hear the rendering of Srimad Bhagavatam so that he could re-establish himself completely in the identity of being a servant of the Lord. So he goes from established identity of being a king to dedicating himself to culture his inner life. He sits and cultures his inner life. This really requires time. There's also a message for all of us who are practicing, that there has to be some dedicated time in the future where we don't juggle too many balls. We have to dedicate time, and sooner the better, where we are able to dedicate ourselves to the furthering of our spiritual culture, inner spiritual culture. This requires that we make arrangements that are required for the family, and then we move to the subject of being able to dedicate ourselves with whatever Krishna has provided. So there has to be a firm plan of when we are able to dedicate ourselves. One of the greatest good fortunes which Maharaj Parikshit faced was he knew when the end was coming. 7 days. He had 7 days. He had a fixed responsibility. He also had an amazing teacher. So one of the topics which is being spoken of in this chapter, chapter 18, is that the speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam has to have a singular focus. That person's singular focus should be Krishna consciousness. He must have dedicated himself to Krishna. Krishna should be the only object of his vision. Krishna should be completely the only objective. So Krishna Prema is the only objective. This is the qualification of the speaker. And then the qualification of the listener is that the listener or the person who has come to hear Srimad Bhagavatam must be very eager and enthusiastic of wanting to hear the nectarian stories that are associated with Krishna. So both these qualifications have to be met for things to work out well. Both are required. You see, when we're effectively wanting to preach, when we want to effectively convert a certain purport, a certain set of verses into a message, the speaker has to have the ability to create a mind. If there are 50 listeners, he or she has to be able to create a single mind out of the 50 minds. And then he should be able to address the needs of the single mind. That is the quality of a speaker, because then that's when the classes become very relevant for anyone and everyone who is sitting there. Okay? It is not that they address one section of the audience, they just address the section of the audience who are shastrically oriented, who likes to hear Sanskrit, or they address a section of the audience who particularly have no taste for verses, but then they want a message. They have to be able to address the needs of the audience by creating a single need, and then they start speaking to that single need. And that does not happen unless there's help from the parampara. So the speaker's essential qualification has to be that they have to be dedicated, and that dedication itself should be of the highest quality, where the singular objective in life is Krishna. And then when that happens, the parampara is ready to help. And when the parampara is ready to help, then everything else just falls in place. The audience reciprocates by being very enthusiastic and wanting to listen to the profound message of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is the other topic. Then the qualification of the speaker is further expounded. They start talking about Sutta Goswami. Sutta Goswami is making a statement in chapter 18, saying he comes from a mixed he comes from a mixed heritage. He does not come from a household of highly qualified brahmanas, highly qualified kshatriyas. He comes from a somewhat diminished background. His birth was not such of a high quality in terms of where it was supposed to be. But then his greatest good fortune was he came in touch with very powerful sadhus. So that was his greatest good fortune. Being born in a family which was not considered to be wonderful or qualified by birth, he yet comes in touch with someone who is very qualified. The fire in the person who is very qualified has the ability to qualify one who is not born in a big family or a qualified family. So Sutta Goswami's example is being taken up by Srila Prabhupada, where this was the whole purpose of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu's preaching was such that he qualified by his presence. Srila Haridas Thakur, a known example of someone who came from a Mohammedan background. He came from a background of Muslims or Islam, and he comes from that background. And in the system that existed those days, he did not belong into the 4 varnas or ashrams. So in such a situation, where was the authority? The authority came by association of Mahaprabhu. The moment he associated with Mahaprabhu, the qualities required come to a person because of association with such a qualified personality as Krishna himself. And then he is able to preach, and he is able to become the authority that is required. This was the foundation of our movement. And it is also said that since it is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, very specifically it is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that being born in a certain family does not qualify one, but being born in a certain family and also being in touch with transcendental knowledge is surely very welcome. But Prabhupada is very clear, Srila Prabhupada, that in our transcendental movement, in Krishna consciousness, this system of being able to recognize one's worth by coming in touch with transcendental truth and by the practice is far more profound than anywhere else. You see, our movement is the future, it is the present, and it is also the future, because we are completely aligned with Shastra. The definition of Varna, Ashram, and everything is extraordinarily aligned with Shastra. The purpose is also being served by aligning ourselves with the Yuga Dharma. As a consequence, the movement of Lord Chaitanya is the present, it's also the future of mankind, purely because we are aligned 100% with Shastric revelation and the truth of Shastra. There is absolutely no confusion in terms of how Shastric truths are being implemented. There is no confusion. Right? And we have seen that being demonstrated by our acharyas, Srila Prabhupada and his disciples, and so on and so forth. So the point we wanted to make here was that's also being addressed here in terms of the qualification of the speakers. Sutta Goswami is one of the speakers, and he says, I'm not from a good background. So one may not be from a good background, or one could be disqualified because they are not from a good background in terms of birth. One could be disqualified because they have acted in a certain way. Guna karma vibhagashaha. Right? They could be born in a certain family, and they could be qualified, and they could be disqualified because of the same fact. They could be acting in a certain way, and they could be qualified or disqualified on a certain fact. All of these things, attributes, change when they come in touch with transcendence. Transcendence in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam and the practicing devotee who is preaching Srimad Bhagavatam. Both of these have transformative effect on the consciousness of the recipient. And as a consequence, even though one may be of questionable heritage, even though one may be of coming from a background where actions were not proper, even from a questionable heritage or a good heritage but actions were improper, such a person has immense scope to transform themselves into very effective vessels of being able to carry the same truth forward, because they are coming in touch with transcendence by coming in touch with a devotee of the Lord and a practitioner and a reader of Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, so let's read the verses of chapter 18 and then we'll go further. Today we'll do a few verses, and then the subsequent session we can do the rest. I will again limit myself to just reading the English to save time. Chapter 18, Maharaj Parikshit cursed by a Brahmana boy. Sri Sutta Goswami said, due to the mercy of the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna, who acts wonderfully, Maharaj Parikshit, though struck by the weapon of the son of Drona in his mother's womb, could not be burned. It's quite an astonishment which is being spoken of here. Here they are saying Maharaj Parikshit was actually struck by the Brahmastra, and Krishna intervened, and he could not be burnt by the Brahmastra, even though he was in his mother's womb in a more vulnerable position than he is now. Okay? So what is the surprise? The surprise is, how is this person who could not be touched by the Brahmastra in the womb of his mother because he was so vulnerable, he could not be touched? How is that the same person is actually being killed and burnt to death by a serpent? Furthermore, Maharaj Parikshit was always consciously surrendered to the personality of Godhead, and therefore he was neither afraid nor overwhelmed by fear due to a snake bird, which was to bite him because of the fury of a Brahmana boy. Furthermore, after leaving all his associates, the king surrendered himself as a disciple to the son of Vyasa, Sukadev Goswami, and thus he was able to understand the actual position of the personality of Godhead. This was so because those who have dedicated their lives to the transcendental topics of the personality of Godhead, of whom the Vedic hymns sing, and who are constantly engaged in remembering the lotus feet of the Lord, do not run the risk of having misconceptions even at the last moment of their lives. So, what is the purport here of this verse? It's an extraordinarily important verse for us. It's verse 4 of chapter 18 of the first canto. Why is it important? It's important because there are many a time when we may have doubts. 40 years hence, 30 years hence, when we are old, incapacitated due to physical problems, perhaps even if there was some distraction which takes us away from Krishna consciousness, how can we be engaged in Krishna consciousness right till the end of our lives? How do we ensure that? The ensuring that we are able to remain Krishna conscious right to the end of our life is to ensure that we are dedicated when we are fully conscious. When we are dedicated to service, when we are dedicated to chanting, when we are dedicated to reading, when we are fully conscious and living, then that particular attribute would also manifest itself at the time of departure. So there's no confusion. So here it is being said, that this is so because those who have dedicated their lives to the transcendental topics of the personality of Godhead, of whom the Vedic hymns sing, and who are constantly engaged in remembering the lotus feet of the Lord, do not run the risk of having misconceptions even at the last moment of their lives. Death is perhaps one of the most, I would say, challenging phases, because it's called a transition. You're practically leaving a certain environment and you're transitioning on to another. And the transition itself brings forth tremendous challenges because the physical body is going to fail. And as a consequence, when the physical body is failing, it would impose itself even more on the consciousness of the person if they're not used to transcending, which is the reason why we'll have to learn to transcend the body while we're completely conscious and healthy. Because the more and more we practice transcending the body when we are healthy, easier would it be for us to implement such a practice even when our body is incapacitated. Because the body in a higher level of mode of ignorance, it would feel heavier than it would if you were healthy. You see? Have you heard of this concept of feeling light and being boundless, filled with energy? And the opposite of that is where the body feels very heavy. The body feeling very heavy is a symptom that the body is not doing what it is supposed to do. It's not carrying itself. The force of gravity is such that it's not able to handle things. The body feels very heavy. This boundless energy is where a person who may be heavy set in terms of bodily weight, but will have energy to be able to carry out what they need to do. The opposite occurs when we feel very heavy. The limbs are heavy, the body is heavy. And this has nothing to do with physical weight. I'm talking about consciousness. So when the body becomes sick, the mode of ignorance increases. The tamas increases in the body. When the tamas increases in the body, it imposes itself on the consciousness of the person as well. The more they identify with such a sick body, the less enthused they will feel to be able to do anything. So death is quite challenging because at that point in time, in most cases, the body is failing. Because the body is failing, it would impose its mode of ignorance on the person and make it even more difficult. Right? So that exactly what is being spoken of here, saying that the moment of death is not as big a challenge to those who have dedicated their lives, because there will be no misconceptions because the body is going to impose on themselves. The misconception is to identify with the body at the time of death. Identify with relatives connected with the body at the time of death. Identify with chores connected with the body at the time of death. That misconception is absent because there's dedication throughout. So that's very important, that this dedication has to be there and the practice has to be there. As long as the great powerful son of Abhimanyu remains the emperor of the world, there's no chance that the personality of Kali would flourish. The very day and moment the personality of Godhead Lord Sri Krishna left the earth, the personality of Kali, who promotes all kinds of irreligious activities, came into this world. Maharaj Parikshit was a realist, like the bees who only accept the essence of a flower. He knew perfectly well that in this age of Kali, auspicious things produce good effects immediately, whereas inauspicious acts must be actually performed to render effects. So he was never envious of the personality of Kali. So he knew perfectly well that in the age of Kali, auspicious things produce good effects immediately. See, that's the benefit of Kali. If you perform auspicious activities, such as calling upon the holy names, which is the most auspicious of all activities, the effects are felt immediately. Inauspicious activities, they really don't influence us unless you go and act upon them. Thinking about them in Kali, thinking about inauspiciousness, thinking about, let us say, inauspicious activities, in general does not impose itself as sinful reactions as much as acting upon them. Acting upon devotional service immediately produces auspiciousness. However, one has to remember, if we constantly think in a negative manner about sinful desires, we would end up engaging in them. There's great danger for a thought to be transformed into action. So things should be arrested at the level of the thought. things should be arrested at the level of the thought. We should become very uncomfortable if we have any thought which goes against religion, which goes against the regulative principles, because such a thought can become action in a short order. Maharaj Parikshit considered that less intelligent men might find the personality of Kali to be very powerful, but those who are self-controlled would have nothing to fear. The king was powerful like a tiger and took care for the foolish, careless persons. O sages, as you did ask me, now I have described almost everything regarding the narrations about Lord Krishna in connection with the history of the pious Maharaj Parikshit. Those who are desirous of achieving complete perfection in life must submissively hear all topics that are connected with the transcendental activities and qualities of the personality of Godhead, who acts wonderfully. The good sages said, O grave Sutta Goswami, may you live many years and have eternal fame, for you are speaking very nicely about the activities of Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead. This is just like nectar for mortal beings like us. We have just begun the performance of this fruitive activity, the sacrificial fire, without certainty of its result due to the many imperfections in our actions. Our bodies have become black from the smoke, but we are factually pleased by the nectar of the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead, Govinda, which you are distributing. So, the sages in Naimisharanya were gathered around and engaging in sacrifices. And those sacrifices themselves had a fruitive motive. And the fruitive motive, or rather karmakanda, of wanting to experience the fruit of such activity is a bit contaminating, and also there is no guarantee that the results will become forthcoming. If there is even the smallest of mistakes in engaging in karmakanda, there will be no results. So it will all be immense labor for nothing, too much work for nothing. So that is something which is also being spoken of here, where the sages have come in touch with Sutta Goswami. They're hearing about transcendental topics, and they're comparing that to the sacrifices which they were engaging in, which only blackened them, with soot. It's almost as if smoke is covering them in certain ways. And they're making a comparison saying, oh, you've spoken about these transcendental topics, the topics which are of such value, the topics that are connected to Krishna. And these topics themselves are so valuable and so wonderful that we find them completely enlivening. And as compared to the fruitive activities in which these fruits are themselves not guaranteed if there's even the slightest of flaw, but engaging in devotional service, there's benefit at every level. The value of a moment's association with the devotee of the Lord cannot even be compared to the attainment of heavenly planets or liberation from matter. And what to speak of worldly benedictions in the form of material prosperity, which are for those who are meant for death. The personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, Govinda, is the exclusive shelter for all great living beings, and his transcendental attributes cannot even be measured by such masters of mystic powers as Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma. Can anyone who is expert in relishing nectar, rasa, ever be fully satisfied by hearing topics about him? O Sutta Goswami, you are a learned and pure devotee of the Lord because the personality of Godhead is your chief object of service. This is the primary qualification of a speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam. He is learned and he is a pure devotee of the Lord because the personality of Godhead is your chief object of service. Therefore, please describe to us the pastimes of the Lord, which are above all material conception, for we are anxious to receive such messages. O Sutta Goswami, please describe those topics of the Lord by which Maharaj Parikshit, whose intelligence was fixed on liberation, attained the lotus feet of the Lord, who is the shelter of Garuda, the king of birds. Those topics were vibrated by the son of Vyasa, Srila Sukadeva. Thus, please narrate to us the narrations of the unlimited, for they are purifying and supreme. They were spoken to Maharaj Parikshit, and they are very dear to the pure devotees, being full of bhakti yoga. Sri Sutta Goswami said, O God, although we are born in a mixed caste, we are still promoted in birthright simply by serving and following the great who are advanced in knowledge. Even by conversing with such great souls, one can without delay cleanse oneself of all disqualifications resulting from lower births. All disqualifications resulting from lower births are completely cleansed when we come in touch with the transcendental message of Srimad Bhagavatam, specifically here heard from people who are qualified to speak Srimad Bhagavatam, which is where the people are themselves completely qualified by their singular focus in wanting to attain Krishna and to serve Krishna. So this is being exemplified here. So we are all very, very fortunate to have come in touch with both forms of Srimad Bhagavatam. We came in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam in the written form, and we also came in touch with Srila Prabhupada. So both of these are good fortune. And even though we are disqualified in so many ways by our birth and by our actions, both of these are disqualifications. By coming in touch with Srila Prabhupada's movement, by coming in touch with Mahaprabhu's movement and Srimad Bhagavatam, we have become qualified because all the disqualifications of past actions and lower birth are being annulled by coming in touch with pure transcendental literature. And what to speak of those who are under the direction of the great devotees, chanting the holy name of the Unlimited, who has unlimited potency. The personality of God, unlimited in potency and transcendental by attributes, is called the Ananta. It is now ascertained that he, the personality of Godhead, is unlimited and there is none equal to him. Consequently, no one can speak of him adequately. Great demigods cannot obtain the favor of the goddess of fortune even by prayers, but this very goddess renders service unto the Lord, although he is unwilling to have such service. Who can be worthy of the name of the Supreme Lord but the personality of God is Sri Krishna? Brahmaji collected the water emanating from the nails of his feet in order to award it to Lord Shiva as a worshipful welcome. This very water, the Ganges, Ganga, is purifying the whole universe, including Lord Shiva. Self-controlled persons who are attached to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna can all of a sudden give up the world of material attachments, including the gross body and subtle mind, and go away to attain the highest perfection of the renounced order of life by which non-violence and renunciation are consequential. Let me read this again. Self-controlled persons who are attached to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna can all of a sudden give up the world of material attachment, including the gross body and subtle mind, and go away to attain the highest perfection of the renounced order of life by which non-violence and renunciation are consequential. This is a very powerful statement, because if one becomes attached to chanting of the holy names, then the qualification of renunciation becomes fully available to such a person. Self-controlled persons who are attached to the Supreme Lord can all in a sudden give up the world of material attachment. It is said at the level of bhava, which is the highest level attained in sadhana bhakti. At the level of bhava, one reaches a point of not even being able to perceive the presence of material stimulation. There is no stimulation, even though activity occurs around. It cannot really stimulate the senses of the person because they have experienced higher truth. So that's the singular qualification of being able to reject material nature and accept spiritual identity and spiritual nature fully. And that's only possible when one is very powerfully situated in being able to chant the holy names of Krishna. So we'll end here and we will see if there are any questions. In the subsequent session, we'll conclude the chapter. But I was wanting to stop here because it will be appropriate. The section or the topic shifts in a few moments to the idea of Maharaj Parikshit coming in touch with the Brahmana boy and being cursed and so on and so forth. So we'll talk about it in a subsequent session, the next session. So the main core topic of chapter 18, it begins with gratitude, and the gratitude is that Sutta Goswami is able to offer the sages of Naimisharanya the nectar associated with glorification of Krishna. And they start with a certain astonishment that this Maharaj Parikshit, he was actually saved from in the womb of his mother from the Brahmastra, which is considered to be the most powerful weapon in creation. He was saved by the Brahmastra itself, from the Brahmastra, by Lord Krishna's intervention. And now we are gathered here to actually learn more about, and we're hearing that he actually departed the world because he was bitten by a snake. So this is quite astonishing, right? So that's how they begin. And then there's a discussion on the most qualifications of the speaker. And the speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam. So there's a discussion between who can speak. I mean, there's a discussion on who can speak, or rather a definition of who can speak. The primary qualification of a speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam is that the only object of service and attachment of that person should be Krishna. That's the primary qualification. The primary qualification of the audience is that they should be very eager and enthusiastic in wanting to hear from the speaker. When both of these aspects combine, then you have katha. You have an immense amount of mercy that pours upon the audience. So that is being spoken of. Then we speak about the fact that, again, 5,000 years back, the ability to speak on confidential topics does not come by birth. It does not come by birth. The qualification is being bestowed upon by coming in touch with such topics and by coming in touch with the personalities who carry such topics in the heart. So that's being spoken of as well in terms of qualification. Okay, I don't see any questions. So if there are any questions, please post them anyways. I will be very happy to answer them. So we'll meet again in the next session. So Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.